Good morning. Welcome to Bible class. So, Moses is a character that certainly worthy of multiple class periods in a quarter-long study of heroes of faith, inspired by Hebrews chapter 11. So we will continue our look at Moses today. A reminder of the rest of the quarter, how that's mapped out. Randy will lead us in Noah, Keith Maddox, Jephthah, Ron Rowe, Daniel, David McCrary, Gideon, Chris Ellis, Isaiah, and then we're going to conclude the quarter with some ancient, extra-biblical heroes from history. Ancient meaning all the way back, first century Christianity, maybe through the Middle Ages, and then I want to look at more modern, 21st century, 20th century folks that are living in our times. So Moses, we looked last class at some things that make him remarkable. We noticed that his birth circumstances portended of someone special. That's God's practice, is to introduce somebody who's going to be, not every case, but a lot of the people who have a very special role in his plan were introduced before they were born, and attention was called to the fact that these were going to be special people. He lived a good long time. This was not unheard of in his era, but a full life. And coincidentally or providentially, you can break his life into 3 periods, neatly into 40-year segments. He was the meekest man on the face of the earth, at least at that time. I don't know if that was backward and forward, but at least while he was alive, that was said of him. Moses saw God. There's at least 3 different interactions with God that would be momentous by any standards. He got 3 in one lifetime, in addition to all the other times there were conversations between him and God. The burning bush, the mountain at the receiving of the law, and then that really special time, extra special time when he asked, "Can I see you?" And the Lord arranged for him to see I call it the hind parts, the back side. I mean, I'm not being crass here, but basically he covered him in the cleft of the rock, and after God had passed, took his hand away, and he got to see the glory, the hint of his glory as he passed. Well, I'm coming in and out. I don't know if this is wiring. God spoke with Moses face to face. We'll look at that again later, but the text goes to some trouble to distinguish between the way God spoke with prophets generally, with other leaders even among Israel. Remember, despite his exceptional status, you see this sometimes in characters in movies or books. You might even see it in real life, where a person demonstrates over and over and over and over again that they are up to the job, they're competent, they're qualified, they may even be exceptional, and they come through and they come through, and yet what do people do the next time there's a challenge? They question them, they doubt them, are you sure? I mean, it just, superheroes deal with this, parents deal with this, Moses dealt with this, and it's just, SMH, right, Aaron? SMH, as you read Exodus, for the older folks, us hip people, we use SMH when we text, shaking my head. So God had to tamp down on multiple occasions these little uprisings, and Moses was the center of that, and he pointed out that with other people there's communication, but Moses was special. God spoke with him face to face, as a friend. By the time he died at 120 years old, he was still robust and energetic. His eye was undimmed, his vigor unabated. I think it was his moisturizing cream. If there's at least one, Dead Sea salts, if there's at least one person that laughs at a joke now and then, it just really does a lot for me. Appreciate that, Jane. And then God buried Moses on a mountain. That's a special honor that God puts him to sleep and takes care of his body. Maybe another honor is that Satan was interested in his body, and there was a little bit of a squabble about the body, and so again, there's so many things that distinguish him. I feel like last time I maybe gave short shrift to the overall significance of Moses, so let's take a little bit of time to look at that. Moses was a deliverer. He delivered his people. In Exodus chapter 3, when he calls Moses at the burning bush, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings. I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of the land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, this is God talking to Moses, come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. So he was a deliverer in a magnificent way. He was a mediator for the covenant. Exodus chapter 34, the Lord said to Moses, write these words, for in accordance with these words I have made a covenant with you and with Israel. He was the go-between. He's the one that went up on the mountain with some other people. It gets overlooked. Some other people went up, partway into the mountain, but it was Moses was the one person that was the mediator between God and the people. This is probably an overlooked role. We remember that his brother, Aaron, was the first high priest, and from him descended the high priests. Of course, they were from the tribe of Levi, which was ordained to be the priestly tribe. But in Psalm 99, verse 6, Moses and Aaron were among his priests. Samuel also was among those who called upon his name. They called to the Lord, and he answered them. Moses was a priest. Of course, we see that in the generic sense. A priest is someone who goes to the people on behalf of God, who intercedes before God on behalf of the people. So in a generic sense, he clearly fits that role. But Scripture also specifically calls him a priest. Is that a hand twitching, Keith, or just exercising? Okay. I looked for passages that expressly call Moses a ruler, and it's a little tricky, not easy to find. Again, this is another one where if you just look at the behavior, if you look at the role he played for the people, if you look at the authority that he had from God, I think it's accurate to call him a ruler. He was not a king, strictly speaking, but he was their leader. He was the authority that gave them instructions. It's ironic, isn't it, that the notable, famous episode where he kills the Egyptian, and the next day he comes out and he tries to settle a squabble between two brethren, and one of them says, "Who made you a ruler and a judge over us?" The implication is, you're trying to, but nobody has made you that. You're not a ruler. But 40 years later, God makes him a ruler, a leader. If you go to Exodus 36:6 is just an example of the language. So Moses gave command, and word was proclaimed throughout the camp. Let no man or woman do anything more for the contribution for the sanctuary. So the people were restrained from bringing more offerings. That's where they were commanded to collect, to give voluntarily and collect things for making the tabernacle. And it was a great success. People were very generous. They had way more than they needed. And then he was a prophet. He was a prophet. Yes, Meredith. Yeah, good point. Yeah. So his preeminence among all the people. There were some important people. There was a hierarchy of leadership. He was visibly, obviously, at the top, and there were people who didn't like that, who thought that they should, why are you special? We're in the same family as you. We've also spoken with the Lord. And repeatedly, God affirms Moses' role as the leader, the spokesperson for God in this time period. So he was a prophet. I read some commentary that he was the first prophet of the nation of Israel. I guess that's kind of debatable when you talk about the people. Abraham was a prophet. He spoke to God, with God, for God. You have all the patriarchs from him, 3 generations. Joseph would be a prophet. He received revelation from God through dreams, interpretation of dreams. So when does the nation start? I mean, the people started with Abraham and the 70 who went into Egypt, and they grew from there. So they were the people of God. They were the people that God identified. They don't really become considered a nation until you have an identity and a land and a law. So that's happening during Moses' generation. And so you could say he was the first prophet of the nation, right? So if you go to Deuteronomy chapter 34, this is a summary of Moses in his role as a prophet. Verse 10 beginning, "And there has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. None like him for all the signs and the wonders that the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his servants and to all his land, and for all the mighty power and all the great deeds of terror that Moses did in the sight of Israel." Yeah, I think that's really indisputable. There were some other impressive prophets. I think Elijah and Elisha come to mind. But when you stack up the career of Moses with any other prophet, he's not only the first, but he is the greatest prophet. And that brings me to really the climactic point here that I want to highlight, which is whenever you have in the Old Testament a character that has these properties, these qualities, it is often that God will use that representation as a shadow to point to something coming in future, something that's going to be greater. And Moses surely is one of those, a tremendous example of one of those. The Hebrew writer makes note of this in the early chapters of Hebrews. And Moses himself is told by God in a messianic prophecy that that's the way it's going to be. If we go to, where do I want to go next? If we go to, let's see, it's 15. I want to say 15. Oh, here it is. Deuteronomy 18:15. Yeah, right there. Sorry. So he's a prophet. He was a prophet unlike any other among Israel, but he's also the type for the prophet. So notice what God tells Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 18, and Moses passes this on to the people. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me among you from your brothers. It is to him you shall listen. Just as you desired of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when you said, let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God, or see his great fire any more, lest I die. The Lord said to me, they are right in what they have spoken. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brothers, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. And whoever will not listen to my words, that he will speak in my name, I myself will require it of him. Now, this is a momentous statement. I suppose the people would hear it as such in the time that they heard it. Remember the context. The larger context is we're being drawn out of Egypt as slaves and being delivered out of the land, and we're heading to this promised land that we've heard about. Our parents told us about it. Our grandparents told us about it. You know, it's 400 plus years, maybe 430 years exactly, that we've been hearing about this, and it's finally going to happen, and we're going to this land, and Moses is this great leader who's leading us, and we go to this mountain, and we get this law, and there's this really scary experiences where the mountain is shaking, and there's cloud descending, and there's loud noises and thunder. We make a mistake. We get impatient. We wonder what happened to Moses after 40 days. What happened to him? So we do this golden calf thing, and it was bad. It was wrong. A bunch of us got slaughtered. And Moses comes after seeing God, he comes to look at us, and we can't handle him because he's glowing. He's got some aura about him. It's just really strong and bright and powerful and scary. And we're just scared. So we said, Moses, please don't let God talk to us directly anymore. You go talk to him. We cannot handle this. We're going to die. He's going to break out on us again, and we're going to die. And Moses, please put something over that, okay? You got to cover that up because we can't handle that. And so Moses said, okay. God's going to raise up another prophet like unto me, and he's going to speak words from God, and you better listen to him. If you don't listen to him, God's going to require it of you. Now, does it surprise that through the generations, this reference gets held up as one of those things we're watching for, those personages that we're waiting for in our history who's going to come? Just like the son of David became that, just like when he promised that Elijah will come again. And so when you come to the New Testament era, when you come to the time of Jesus and John, before that, you have hundreds of years of prophets coming to the people. God sends prophets to the people to try to warn them and get them to repent and tell them of judgment that's coming. Every one of those prophets is called a prophet. None of them are called the prophet. But there is this reference in Deuteronomy to the prophet. And so they're looking for the prophet. And so when John is the first prophet since Malachi, and the Pharisees he's getting people's attention. He's over at Jordan baptizing, and he's gaining a following. And so the important people are sending emissaries over to say, hey, who are you? What's your authority? What's your teaching? What signs can you do to prove who you are, that you're from God? And so they asking questions. Are you Elijah? See, that's one of those notable characters that God had promised in the Old Testament. I'm going to send you Elijah. He's going to make the path straight. And John said, no, I'm not Elijah. Well, are you the prophet? And who did they mean? Deuteronomy 18:15. The one who is like Moses. So are you the prophet? No, not the prophet. And so they're just challenging. Why are you baptizing? Why are you doing what you're doing? John's answer is clear. Jesus, not I, Jesus is the one of whom the law of Moses and the prophets wrote. And then you remember the Samaritan woman, the interaction with the Samaritan woman at the well in John chapter 4. What did she call him? What did she perceive from the interaction as it went on? Sir, I perceive you're a prophet, right? But by later in John chapter 6, Jesus is, again, public speaking. John does a lot of this, where he'll give an account of some interaction. It'll be either a group of people or a public teaching, and he also shares the reaction of the people. Like, what are the mumblings going through the crowd? Some are saying this, some are asking this. And in this case, in John chapter 6, verse 14, someone in the crowd, a voice is being represented as saying, this is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world. So the point being that this is a big deal. This passage is a big deal. It is one of the messianic monikers, one of the ways that God dropped a hint, a breadcrumb, to a marker to let people remember. We're going to have a comparison. It's going to be somebody like Moses, and he's going to be greater than Moses, and you need to be watching for him, and you need to be ready to listen to him. Now, when you get to Acts chapter 3, in one of the early sermons, and Peter's preaching, this would be at the temple after they heal the lame man, and there's a big crowd gathering, and he just continues to preach. Acts chapter 3, let's pick up in verse 19. Repent therefore and return, that your sins may be wiped away, in order that times of refreshing may come from the presence of the Lord, and that he may send Jesus, the Christ, appointed for you, whom heaven must receive until the period of restoration of all things, about which God spoke by the mouth of his holy prophets from ancient time. And then he quotes Moses. Moses said, the Lord God shall raise up for you a prophet like me from your brethren. To him you shall give heed in everything he says to you. And it shall be that every soul that does not heed that prophet shall be utterly destroyed from among the people. And likewise, all the prophets who have spoken from Samuel and his successors onward also announce these days. It is you who are the sons of the prophets and of the covenant which God made with your fathers, saying to Abraham, and in your seed all the families of the earth shall be blessed. For you first God raised up his servant and sent him to bless you by turning every one of you from your wicked ways. So here in this passage, did you catch that? How many different ones of these special monikers, these markers, is Peter referencing in one little concluding remark? You got the prophet, Moses and the prophet. You got Abraham and the seed. And then, what's that? Yeah, well, so he's summarizing here. He's summarizing, and he's saying Samuel and the prophets all spoke about him, about Jesus. So he calls him the Christ early on, in that verse 18, right? But at the very conclusion, he's hitting these quotes from Old Testament references. He quotes Moses verbatim about the prophet. He's going to raise the prophet up. There's going to be one like me, the prophet. So he's the prophet, he's the seed, the one that he told Abraham, in your seed, all the nations of the world will be blessed. Guess what? He's the seed, and he's also Isaiah's servant, the suffering servant. See, these are all personages. These are all characters, descriptions that were placed in the Old Testament to point to someone coming later. And Jesus is all of those things. So, he's deliverer, he's covenant mediator, he's priest, he's ruler, he's a prophet, Moses. But do you see how he's a fitting type, a fitting shadow for the one who's going to come after him, who's the prophet? You need to listen to him because Moses was all these things. Jesus was all those things, but greater. Yes, dear? Mm-hmm. Yes, so who was selected to be there to comfort, to converse with Jesus about his, what's the word? What did on the Transfiguration on the mountain, what did the two people talk with Jesus about? So you know those times when you teach younger children Bible classes and you notice the difference between Sunday morning and Wednesday night. Wednesday night it's like, man, did you guys have chocolate? Did you get 100 M&Ms? Did you get 1,000 M&Ms? And then there's the Sunday morning where they're like, oh man, I just woke up, I got sleep. I don't usually have this in an adult class, but this morning I'm having the Sunday morning, Wednesday night dichotomy here. What did the two people on the Transfiguration mountain, what does the text tell us they spoke with Jesus about? Let's back up for a minute. Who were the two people besides Peter, James, and John? Who were the two people that appeared? Moses and Elijah, thank you. And what did they talk to Jesus about? His departure, his exodus. And of course you have Elijah as a representation of prophets. You have Moses as a representation of the law. But you also have two men who had a unique departure, right? And for Moses to be one of those two, who was the great prophet who referenced the prophet that you need to listen to. And then what did God's voice say to this audience of only, what, 4 or 6 people, depending on how you count them, when Peter said, hey, this is really awesome, why don't I'll make some tabernacles, one for each of you. What did God say? Listen to him. Okay? So again, it's all tied together, this prophet reference that he's going to be the one, and you're going to listen to him, and if you don't listen to him, I'm going to hold you to account for it. And here's a stamp of approval that this is my son. He's the one. You need to listen to him. I think that's cool, powerful. All right, let's resume the look at the text in Hebrews 11 that the inspired writer cites as examples of faith from the life of Moses. Already noted that in some respects, not what you would expect. A lot is left out, but we've already noted that. He leaves a lot out for other characters. He leaves a lot of characters out. But here are the things that he cites in the life of Moses. So we already spent a good bit of time talking about the decision, the choice that he made while he was still in Egypt, approaching 40 years of age. He knows he's from the heritage of the Hebrews. He's aware of the promises. He sees that they're enslaved. And one of the New Testament commentators tells us that he believed that he was going to be used as a deliverer. And he thought the people would understand that. And the episode where he intervenes, kills an Egyptian, then he comes the next day and tries to break up some squabbling. They reference the killing. Moses realizes, they're not receiving me well. They're not accepting me as a leader. And what I thought was a secret killing of an Egyptian taskmaster is not secret. The text lets us know that right away that the Pharaoh was aware of it. He was not happy. He was seeking to kill Moses. So everything goes off the rails from Moses' point of view. But what we're told is that he made a conscious decision to risk his position, his standing, his wealth, his security in Egypt to play a role in leading his people and leading them out of slavery. The problem is the timing was off and the methodology was off, but the faith was there. The faith of being willing to risk it for something greater. He'd rather be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. Okay? I'll give a brief period of time for comment on the next one, 11:27, which I think probably is a little striking, arresting. Do you want to talk on the first verse? Okay. Yeah.
When you look at the Old Testament, God never does anything that is against all odds. It's not, the timing is just right. Everybody, he waits till the people are, enslaved, but he waits till the people are down. He waits till the people have no hope. When he comes through here. And Moses would have been the best possible time. He's in the journey, basically looking at how.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he didn't. He could have done like I went to Mark. Mark was a little bit of Mark. But Moses left out of there thinking he could do it. And when he came back.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I like that point. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's so many examples of that where servants of God, people who eventually are servants of God, very effective, impressive servants of God, but there's a point in their life where they thought they were ready, and from a human perspective, you would think that's the time, right? And it's not. It's not the best time. It's not the right time. I won't steal thunder. So I keep stealing thunder from David on David, right? And so I won't make this mistake again. But it reminds me of the story of Gideon, which I'm sure you'll cover, right? And there's others. I'm trying to think of any others off the top of my head that are like Paul. Paul had all these things going for him, but what God needed to do is humble him, and he became a great servant for God, for Jesus. And I'm sure there's lots of other examples that fit that model of impressive, surely this is the one, surely I'm ready now. No, either wrong person or wrong timing. Other things need to happen first. Thank you. All right, so 11:27. By faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. You want to comment on that? I guess I can make it a little more obvious and set it up, reminding us that in Exodus and in Acts, the writers set right next to each other the killing of the Egyptian, the reaction of the Pharaoh, and Moses fleeing the land, right? And then when you add on top of that the conversation between God and Moses at the burning bush, God adds in, seemingly as a little bit of extra consolation, as extra assurance, he says to Moses, the people who sought your life back in Egypt are all dead. Go back. So the connection between him leaving Egypt and him killing the Egyptian and the Pharaoh trying to kill Moses, are they not inextricably linked? Are they not, by the text, linked together? Are they not cause and effect? Okay, so then how do you account for, by faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king? Yeah. Right. Okay. I think that's a credible explanation. The other one that occurs to me is that can you flee without being afraid? Yeah. Yeah, you can take action that you recognize needs to be taken without being consumed by fear and dread and panic and shaking and right? I think there's lots of examples in Scripture of God's people going about what they need to do to preserve their lives, to follow instructions from God, and they're doing it in faith, aware of the threat, aware of the danger, but not driven by fear. They're driven by trust in God, faith in Him. He's going to take care of them. So that's how I work out in my mind that it looks like from Exodus and Acts that there's a direct correlation between him killing the Egyptian, being discovered by the Pharaoh. Pharaoh's trying to kill him, and he flees for his life. Okay, that's all true. That doesn't mean that he left in fear or afraid of the king, that he left because he needed to, and he still trusted in God. I think of Paul. I mean, Paul fled a lot of times trying to save his life, trying to run from the danger. That doesn't mean that he was shaking in his boots, that he was, living every moment in fear, a fear that is void of faith. He had faith in God. So that's how I correlate those. Any other comments? Okay, and then 11:28, by faith he left the Passover and sprinkled the blood so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. So that's still in Egypt. When he's back in Egypt, keeping the first Passover, sprinkling the blood over the doorpost. And I heard a little snippet on YouTube from one of my favorite commentators, D.A. Carson. He tells a story of, an imagined story of two Hebrews on the night of the Passover. And I'm not going to get it exactly right, but the gist of it is, like, hey, what do you make of this this Passover? I hear the death angels coming over, and all the firstborn are going to be killed. Like, I don't know. I'm a firstborn. I'm a little concerned about that. And his neighbor says, nothing to worry about it. I mean, God's got this. I mean, look at all the other plagues. Everything worked out fine. I don't have a worry in the world. Yeah, well, I'm a firstborn, and I've got a firstborn, and I mean, we're putting blood on the doorposts, and yeah, it's gonna be fine. And when the death angel, whenever I say death angel, I think of the Dallas and Wanda, because I mentioned it one time in some public setting, and they pointed out that it doesn't say the death angel. That's like a modern, name for it. But anyway, the angel comes, the destroyer, and how many of the Hebrew firstborn were killed? None of them. And do you suppose that among all the Hebrews, among all the firstborn, that by faith took that little hyssop and took the blood from the lamb that they slaughtered and they put it on the doorpost? Do you think any of them had a little bit of like, how's this going to work? And I'm still a little concerned, and right? And so D.A. Carson's point is, the power of the faith is in the person you have faith in, the God you have faith in, not in the power of your faith. So even and Jesus makes this point, if you have faith like a mustard seed, right? And that's a good reminder for Christians. Yes, we should be growing in our faith and reaching for stronger faith and deeper faith and trying to stretch and challenge and trust God more, yeah? But don't put your faith in your faith, brothers and sisters. Your faith is in Jesus Christ, and He's so strong and powerful. That's why we're saved. That's why we have hope, is because He's strong, and not because our faith is, the quality of our faith is so great. All right. In our last few minutes, I want to talk about a couple other things. The first one I think we've covered pretty thoroughly, which is the volunteer nature of Moses, especially that early part of his life where he reads the tea leaves, he knows about the promises, he sees the conditions of the people, and he just comes to the conclusion somehow. There's no evidence that God told him, hey, I want you to go do this thing, and then turned around and said, no, you're not going to do this thing right now. There's no evidence of that. It appears that Moses reached this conclusion on his own. And he was mistaken about the timing. It was not part of God's plan. It was not God's methodology. But the fact still remains that he had faith, and he was willing to step up and step into what he saw as a vacuum and play a role for God. The reluctant resistant, Keith has already noted this, but it's striking It's striking when you imagine at 40 years old, he's ready to go and he's ready to take it on himself. And then at the bush, there's 5 different times in this conversation that God tells him, you're going to go. And he says, no, I don't want to go. Send somebody else, right? I can't speak well. Can you send somebody else? Who will I say sent? They won't believe me. And then at the end of all those, this is the one where the text tells us that God was like getting impatient. He was getting upset with Moses after 4 excuses that God has an answer for. Apparently, God considered those reasonable objections. Okay? And so God just came with, okay, throw your rod down. Put your hand in your shirt, okay? Tell them that I am sent you. I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Tell them that I am sent you. They'll believe you. And after the 4th one, Moses just says, I ain't got anything else. I just don't want to go. Can you send somebody else? Please, just send somebody else. And that's when the text says God is like, he was getting upset. And then what? And then what did Moses do? He went. He went. And so, I don't want to say that reluctance and resistance is okay. I don't want to promote it or encourage it, but it did happen. It did happen with a man as great as Moses. And maybe it's partly what you're talking about, that the human pride, the human ego, the human confidence was gone. And now it was just God. I'm only going to do this because God. The last one I want to do is the intercessor. This is remarkable. This is incredible. It shows the relationship that Moses had with God and the respect that God had for Moses. That on at least 2 different occasions, Moses was permitted to basically go toe-to-toe with God and challenge, question, argue with God. Remember, after the golden calf, God says, get out of the way. You get out of the way. I am going to break out on these people, and I'm going to destroy them. And I'm going to start over with you. And Moses is bold enough, though the meekest man on the planet, is bold enough to say, no, Lord, you don't do that. You can't do that. I mean, what will that do to your name? What will that do to your reputation? Everybody will hear. Everybody knows that you brought him out with a strong arm. And then they'll think, what did he do? Bring him out to kill him? Could he not take him to the land? Is he not powerful enough? So Moses interceded and reasoned with God and argued with God, and God relented. There's the time not long after that where Moses just goes to him and says, look, I need more. I need to know more. I need to see more. Who's going to go with me to lead these people? And God tells him, okay, I'll give you what you want. So that is really strong faith. And I think it is like some other instances in the Bible with Abraham negotiating with God about the 100 souls, 50 souls. I don't remember the numbers, 50, 40, 30, and it gets down to 10. That is some aspirational faith right there, where you can go to God and tell him what you want, tell him what you need, beg God, plead with God. In some cases, even in the face of what he said is something else. And you go back to him and say, no, please. Final point, I'll make this second bell. But a lifelong testing of his faith, I mean, you could say that Moses was a failure. You could say that Moses was a failure. You could cherry pick the facts and say he's a failure. Think about this. He thought at age 40 he was the deliverer, and he got rejected. His life's purpose was to deliver his people. 40 years later, he gets called to do it. He goes in and he faces opposition the whole way. And does he get the people who left Egypt, does he get them into the land? No, he does not. They die in the wilderness. They don't follow him. And does he get to go in the land? No, he does not. So you could argue, Moses, you were terrible. But his faith was so strong that it went through all those decades of all those challenges, all those disappointments, and he still trusts in God, and he's looking at the long game, right? The end game. Great example of faith. Thank you.